Let's dig in. After looking at the vaporized remains of ancient civilizations in our last deep dive, we have to ask, where did the survivors go? The answer is hidden in the stone. If you pour $1 billion into a modern steel-reinforced skyscraper today, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake will still snap its spine like a dry twig. It's an undeniable, terrifying fact of modern engineering. So here is the jarring paradox we need to address. How is it that ancient builders, supposedly armed with nothing but primitive chisels, river rocks, and raw manpower, engineered megastructures that have laughed in the face of Earth's most violent, continent-cracking cataclysms for thousands of years? We aren't looking at isolated anomalies or lucky architecture today. Grab your red yarn. We are mapping out a global survival schematic. Chapter 10. The Temple of Garni, Armenia. Suspended on the edge of a jagged, triangular cliff in the Kotyk province of Armenia, the Temple of Garni looks like a fragile ornament dropped from the sky. This isolated fortress sits directly atop one of the most volatile, seismically hyperactive fault networks on the Eurasian plate. It is a geographical nightmare. The ground here doesn't just shake, it violently ruptures. Yet, while countless surrounding villages and massive modern concrete structures have been utterly flattened by historic tremors, this lone basalt temple refuses to fall. To understand why it survives, we have to look at a mathematical impossibility hidden inside the stone. First-century builders didn't just stack these massive basalt blocks on top of one another, they hollowed out precise internal cavities and filled them with molten lead and iron clamps. To melt iron, you need sustained blast furnace temperatures exceeding 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. When a massive earthquake hits, the rigid iron holds the structural blocks together, while the softer lead, which has an incredibly low shear modulus, plastically deforms. It essentially acts as a tuned mass damper. They built a flexible, energy-dissipating foundation capable of riding out a 9.0 magnitude tectonic event without shattering. The academic consensus casually waves away these iron and lead clamps as mere decorative joining techniques. So who warned them that the Earth would try to swallow this specific cliff? The evidence points to inherited trauma. They were survivors of a prior unrecorded cataclysm, passing down a strict post-apocalyptic building code. Finding this level of tectonic mastery in the rocky cliffs of Armenia is bizarre enough. But discovering its mechanical twin deep within the volcanic jungles of Indonesia? That means a singular blueprint of survival was spreading across the entire globe. Chapter 9. Prambanan Temple, Indonesia. Deep within the humid, hyperactive tectonic cauldron of Java, Indonesia, smack in the middle of the Pacific Ring of Fire, stands the Prambanan Temple complex. This is an environment where the Earth is in a state of perpetual violence, besieged by frequent volcanic eruptions and catastrophic seismic tremors. Building a towering, top-heavy stone structure in this specific location is practically begging for a collapse. Yet 240 magnificent spires, some reaching 47 meters into the sky, have stood their ground against Mother Nature's absolute worst. The secret to Prambanan's immortality shares the exact same kinetic philosophy as the Temple of Garni: flexibility over rigid strength. But instead of using molten metal to absorb shockwaves, the builders here engineered an intricate system of dry stone Lego masonry. There is absolutely zero mortar used in the core structure. Instead, millions of dense andesite blocks feature precision-cut interlocking grooves and spherical knobs. When a massive volcanic tremor hits, the stones are mathematically designed to slide against one another, shifting just millimeters at a time. This frictional sliding dissipates the kinetic energy, allowing the massive 47-meter spires to physically sway like trees in a hurricane without snapping. Institutional archaeologists frame this genius as a happy primitive accident, claiming they simply hadn't invented mortar yet. It begs a chilling question. Who delivered the warning to make the stones sway instead of stand firm? The answer seems to be a global guild of master masons, an ancient data-sharing network that monitored structural failures across centuries and shared the perfected blueprints. Constructing a flexible, swaying defense against planetary shockwaves in Southeast Asia is an engineering marvel. But why do we find the exact same vibration-damping principles in the mountains of Lebanon? Chapter 8. The Temple of Jupiter, Lebanon. Welcome to Baalbek, Lebanon, an ancient, sun-baked site resting in the Bekaa Valley. This is a region historically pulverized by the immense pressures of the Dead Sea Transform fault line. Dominating this fractured landscape is the Temple of Jupiter, a structure so absurdly massive it induces a sense of vertigo just standing near its base. It is an isolated megalithic monster that defies the very landscape it was built upon, challenging gravity and common sense in equal measure. Here is where the puzzle pieces begin to truly connect. Just like Prambanan utilized interlocking stones to dissipate energy, the Temple of Jupiter engineered a vibration-proof base to survive the exact same seismic threat. But instead of thousands of small shifting stones, the builders here went with brute force mass damping. The foundation contains the trilithon, 3 distinct limestone blocks weighing an unfathomable 800 tons each. To move a single 800-ton block requires a sustained kinetic force of roughly 1.6 million pounds. By placing these hyperdense anomalies at the absolute base, they effectively grounded the structure's center of mass so perfectly that no known tectonic shockwave can achieve the resonance frequency required to topple it. The authorized narrative insists the Romans quarried these behemoths purely to flex their imperial ego, which forces us to ask, who warned them that localized mass dampers were the only way to survive? The data suggests deep-time geophysical mapping. They weren't just building, they were reading the Earth's subterranean fault lines with a level of geophysical science we thought we just invented. Yet, utilizing sheer, unadulterated mass to absorb global shockwaves in the Levant is one thing. Substituting that solid stone for a highly tuned liquid shock absorption matrix 600 miles away in Iran, that points to a shared mastery of physics that shouldn't exist. Chapter 7. The Ziggurat of Chogha Zanjibil, Iran. Located in the brutal, sun-scorched Khuzestan province of southwestern Iran, the Ziggurat of Chogha Zanjibil rises out of the desolate plains like a baked clay mountain. This specific region isn't just battered by earthquakes, it is subjected to wild thermal expansions and relentless geological settling. It's an incredibly hostile environment where mud brick structures usually dry out, turn brittle, and crumble into dust within a few short generations. Taking a page right out of the Temple of Jupiter's playbook, this massive ziggurat was engineered to utterly neutralize environmental shockwaves. But the architects here swapped out 800-ton limestone blocks for advanced viscodynamic fluid dynamics. They built the massive structure using alternating layers of baked brick and raw bitumen. And here is your visceral nightmare. Raw bitumen is a suffocating, boiling tar pit of primordial hydrocarbons. It smells like rotting corpses, and if you fell into a hot vat of it, the viscosity is so intensely sticky it would literally slough the skin right off your bones. By layering this terrifying sludge between reeds and bricks, the builders created a flexible shock absorption system. The bitumen acts as a non-Newtonian fluid under stress, absorbing kinetic impacts without suffering brittle fracture. Museum plaques consistently write off this massive hydrocarbon matrix as simple primitive waterproofing. But seriously, who warned an ancient desert culture to weaponize non-Newtonian fluids against seismic shock? The terrifying reality points to alchemical trial and error spanning tens of thousands of years of lost human history, refining liquid defense to a microscopic level. Using advanced fluid dynamics to stabilize a monument in the Iranian desert is a mechanical masterclass. However, Seeing this exact same obsession with fluid defense weaponized in the high peaks of Peru proves we're looking at a global phenomenon. Chavin de Huantar, Peru. We now jump to a breathless elevation of 3,177 meters in the Peruvian Andes. Chavin de Huantar sits directly in a narrow, high-altitude valley prone to torrential, violent flash floods and massive mudslides. It is arguably the absolute worst place on the continent to build a permanent, sprawling stone complex. The sheer volume of water that funnels through this geographical choke point during the rainy season is enough to shear the rocky face right off a mountain. Much like the engineers at Chogazan-Bil manipulated viscous fluids to protect their structure, the builders of Chavin created a kinetic hydraulic defense system to survive cataclysmic water flow. The entire temple is built atop an incredibly complex network of subterranean galleries and steep drainage canals. When millions of gallons of floodwater hit the site, the surge is instantly funneled underground into precisely angled stepped channels. The math here is terrifying. The hydrodynamic pressure of the incoming water is intentionally manipulated to create a hydraulic jump, safely dissipating the kinetic energy. The friction and air pressure inside these acoustic chambers literally cause the temple to emit a deafening, visceral roar, like a massive jaguar, as it rapidly drains the mountain's wrath away from the structural core. Orthodox scholars insist these subterranean acoustics were just religious theater. So who sounded the alarm that the mountains would suddenly unleash rivers of mud? This points directly to an ancient meteorological watch group, a society that tracked long-term, multi-millennial weather cycles that modern science is only just discovering. Discovering this high-altitude water diversion technology in Peru is stunning on its own. Finding an almost identical hydrodynamic defense system built to survive massive oceanic waves in Bolivia. That means the entire Andean spine was preparing for a deluge. Chapter 5. Tiwanaku and the Cala Sasaya Temple, Bolivia. Perched on the desolate Altiplano of Bolivia, 12,500 feet above sea level, is the Cala Sasaya Temple at Tiwanaku. It is a freezing, oxygen-deprived wasteland where absolutely nothing should thrive. Yet scattered across this surreal plateau are monolithic stones carved with laser-like precision alongside a sprawling drainage system that looks utterly out of place in a dry, high-altitude desert environment. Just as Chavin de Huantar was meticulously designed to survive extreme fluid dynamics, Tiwanaku is heavily fortified with its own hydrodynamic resilience. But the math suggests they weren't preparing for seasonal rain, they were preparing for the ocean. Geologists have found oceanic salt sediment and fossilized seahorses resting on this high plateau. To survive the sudden cataclysmic oceanic surges, builders used heavy bronze staples poured directly into the rock to lock the massive blocks together. The tensile strength of the copper-arsenic-nickel alloy used in these staples is staggering, explicitly capable of resisting the massive shear forces of a sudden deep-water impact. They created an unbreakable stone mesh designed to let surging water pass through its subterranean drains while the monolithic core held fast. The accepted academic timeline stubbornly categorizes these oceanic drains as ceremonial baths. But who on earth warned an inland empire that an oceanic tsunami would reach 12,500 feet into the sky? The only logical answer is a pre-Diluvian maritime culture, survivors of the original Great Flood who knew exactly how high the water could rise, engineering their strongholds accordingly. And if you think building a tsunami-proof fortress at 12,500 feet in the Andes is a geographical anomaly, tracing that exact same magnetic tsunami shield to the middle of the Pacific Ocean will shatter your worldview. Chapter 4. Non-Modal Micronesia. In the remote, unforgiving waters of Micronesia, just off the island of Pohnpei, lies a place that defies all conventional logic: Non-Madal. This is an entirely artificial archipelago constructed directly on top of a fragile coral reef in the open Pacific. It is incredibly isolated, battered by relentless typhoons, and fully exposed to the most devastating rogue waves and tsunamis the ocean can possibly generate. Just like Tiwanaku was fiercely armored against oceanic surges, Non-Madal was engineered as a brute force structural wave breaker. But the builders here didn't use bronze staples. They moved 250 million tons of naturally magnetized basalt logs, stacking them in an intricate crisscrossing pattern to absorb and shatter the kinetic force of incoming tsunamis. Basalt is incredibly dense, weighing around 185 pounds per cubic foot. By stacking these magnetic logs in a permeable grid, the immense hydraulic pressure of a tsunami is forced to rapidly diffuse through the gaps, breaking the wave's absolute power before it reaches the inner sanctums. It is a 250 million-ton kinetic shock absorber resting entirely on coral. The peer-reviewed consensus firmly labels this staggering grid as a simple royal vacation retreat. This leaves us staring at a massive geographical plot hole. Who warned them that rogue megawaves would target this unprotected reef? All signs point to geomantic grid mappers, a civilization that could literally sense and measure the Earth's natural magnetic nodes, using them to anchor against the ocean's wrath. Utilizing unique magnetized geology to survive catastrophic oceanic impacts in Micronesia is a mind-bending feat. But taking that exact same obsession with magnetic geology and dropping it directly onto an impact zone in the United States, the pattern is undeniable. Chapter 3: The Great Serpent Mound, USA. Hidden in the lush, quiet forests of Adams County, Ohio, the Great Serpent Mound is a massive 1,300-foot-long earthwork shaped like a snake swallowing an egg. But the real anomaly isn't the artistic shape, it's the highly specific ground it sits on. This mound is built directly on the edge of a massive, ancient crypto-explosion crater. The localized geography here is violently scarred, an incredibly chaotic mix of uplifted bedrock and shattered limestone that is entirely alien to the surrounding rolling plains. Much like the builders of Non-Madal specifically chose basalt for its unique properties, the architects of the Serpent Mound deliberately chose a site with a severe localized magnetic anomaly. Because it sits directly on an ancient impact crater, the gravitational and magnetic fields here are measurably distorted. The working theory is that this specific geometry and geology were chosen because the local magnetic bedrock provides intense localized stability during severe planetary polar shifts and electromagnetic disturbances. The precise helical shape of the mound mirrors advanced waveform mathematics, mapping perfectly to the disrupted magnetic flux lines of the crater beneath it. Established academic dogma firmly groups this geomantic instrument into the standard effigy mound category. So who tipped them off to anchor this geometry perfectly over an invisible magnetic crater? The implication here is a top-down, high-orbital perspective. Whether through lost aviation technology or something else entirely, they could see the invisible magnetic scars of the planet from above. Chapter 2: Chand Baori, India. In the arid, unforgiving state of Rajasthan, India, sits Chand Baori. It looks less like a traditional building and more like an inverted pyramid driven straight down into the Earth's crust. Plunging 100 feet deep with 3,500 perfectly symmetrical labyrinth-like steps, this structure is utterly isolated in a region known for blistering, deadly surface temperatures. It is a stunning architectural optical illusion built upside down. Just as the Serpent Mound utilized the Earth's natural geometry for protection,
Chand Baori dives violently into the bedrock to exploit the strict laws of thermodynamics. It is engineered from top to bottom as a massive gravity-fed thermal sanctuary. The math is beautifully flawless. Because cold air is denser than hot air, it naturally sinks. As you descend the 3,500 geometric steps, the temperature drops by exactly 5 to 6 degrees Celsius compared to the boiling surface above. The precise fractal geometry of the steps minimizes surface area exposure to the sun while maximizing shadow retention. If a severe atmospheric heating event, like a massive solar flare or meteor airburst, were to scorch the surface, Chand Baori acts as an unbreakable subterranean bunker. The institutional gatekeepers completely ignore the thermodynamics, labeling this bunker a simple community water well. Which brings up the most unsettling question yet. Who warned them that the sky was literally going to catch fire? The math suggests predictive solar astronomy. They were tracking violent coronal mass ejections over a millennia-long cycle, calculating the exact day the atmosphere would turn into an oven. Engineering an inverted thermal sanctuary in India is staggering on its own. But discovering this exact same atmospheric isolation technology built to withstand literal flash bake events in Egypt, that is where the global detective board lights up in bright red. Chapter 1. The Temple of Hathor, Egypt. Finally, we arrive at the legendary Dendera temple complex in Egypt, home to the Temple of Hathor. Sitting on the edge of the blazing Sahara, the surface of this temple is heavily weathered by millennia of scorching sun and grinding sand. But the true anomaly isn't found anywhere on the surface. Hidden deep beneath the colossal stone floors lies a network of claustrophobic, heavily shielded subterranean crypts. They are deeply isolated, completely airless, and entirely cut off from the outside world. Matching Chand Baori's absolute mastery of thermodynamic cooling, the crypts beneath the Temple of Hathor take atmospheric isolation to its most frightening extreme. These deep chambers are encased in massive limestone blocks that act as perfect thermal insulators. Regardless of whether it is freezing at night or 115 degrees on the Egyptian surface, the temperature inside these crypts remains locked at a constant, unyielding 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The math required to calculate the thermal mass and equilibrium of these specific stones is heavily precise. They are designed to survive a localized flash bake event. Imagine a coronal mass ejection hitting the Earth, instantly spiking surface temperatures to 400 degrees. Your skin would blister instantly, and the sheer visceral heat would literally boil the moisture inside your lungs, suffocating you in seconds. The crypts of Hathor would perfectly insulate whatever was inside, keeping them in a pristine 72-degree stasis while the world above burned to ash. Traditional Egyptologists will look you dead in the eye and claim these highly engineered, climate-controlled bunkers were merely storage closets for clay pots. So for the final time, who warned them to build a perfect 72-degree stasis bunker against a global flashbake event? The darkest answer is that the ones who warned them were the ones who pulled the trigger. It wasn't just a natural cycle. It was a scheduled planetary reset, heavily monitored by an intelligence vastly superior to our own. Chapter 0. Bonus. The Tower of Jericho, Ancient Palestine. Before we close the book on this global puzzle, I want to try something new. One of my viewers asked me a simple but brilliant question in the comments. What about ancient Palestine? Look, if you have a specific location keeping you up at night, drop it below. I read them, and I'm always ready to build a new detective board for you. So, for that viewer, here is your bonus chapter. Down in the Jordan Rift Valley, over 800 feet below sea level, sits the ancient site of Tel es-Sultan, Jericho. This isn't just an active earthquake zone on the Dead Sea Transform Fault. During the turbulent end of the last ice age, this valley acted as a deadly funnel for catastrophic, violently sudden flash floods. Topographically speaking, it is the absolute last place you'd want to build a permanent settlement. Yet over 10,000 years ago, long before the invention of the wheel, they built a 28-foot-tall solid stone megalith. This isn't just a pile of rocks, it is a mathematically perfect conical tower featuring a precisely calculated 22-degree internal staircase. The math here is all about fluid dynamics. If a massive wall of water hits a flat surface, the hydrostatic pressure causes immediate catastrophic failure. But a conical geometry splits the hydraulic shear stress, reducing the kinetic impact coefficient by over 50%. Imagine the visceral terror of a 20-foot wall of roaring, suffocating mud carrying uprooted trees and animal corpses down the valley. This tower was engineered as a hydrodynamic wedge to split that wave down the middle and protect the settlement hiding behind it. The established archaeological narrative insists this 10,000-year-old engineering marvel was just a primitive watchtower. But who warned a supposedly primitive band of hunter-gatherers to utilize advanced hydrodynamic geometry to break a megaflood? The math points to a post-glacial survivor network, people who had witnessed the violent planet-wide melting of the Younger Dryas and passed down a very specific mathematical blueprint for surviving the rising waters. From the flood-breaking towers of Jericho to the flash-bake crypts in Egypt, the math simply doesn't lie. Our ancestors weren't just building monuments to pray to the gods, they were building indestructible bunkers to survive them. So, I'll turn the detective board over to you. Who do you think warned them? Was it inherited trauma, a lost maritime culture, or something looking down from above? Drop your absolute best theories in the comments below. As you saw with today's Jericho bonus chapter, I actually read them. Your 3 a.m. late-night rabbit holes literally become our next episodes. Tell me where to pin my next red string. If today's deep dive made you question everything you were forced to memorize in high school history class, do me a favor and hit that like button. It forces the YouTube algorithm to stop feeding people mindless slop and start pushing actual history. And if you want a permanent seat at this desk, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are building the biggest, most unapologetic puzzle on the internet, and you don't want to miss the next piece. Stay curious, stay slightly paranoid, and I'll see you in the next one.